therefore, in the whole world, the system is either political or it is economical. What the general said before, I think, is one of the exceptions, is the climate disasters which bring refugees to other places. And this is a very difficult question that nobody can prevent, or at least that's your subject about climate, but it will take a long time. And this, of course, is the most difficult thing to handle. In other cases, le droit d'ingérence, as Kouchner said, the right to go into a country where the own country is not taking care of its own people, should come forward. And also, in a general manner, you are talking about a difficult world in every case, but I think fundamentally we should change the rules to make more effective rules, more efficient rules, and of course more faster decisions. The last comment I would like to make is about Afghanistan, which I think is a very special case, because that's a case of war where the humanitarian is only the consequence of the war, and it's a war that is trying to destroy the Occidental civilization, if I take it in a big image. So I could make a lot of other comments, but I will stop here, because I think that I hope I expressed myself well enough, you have understood what you think about that.
Who would like to respond? Rita?
Well, the old droit d'ingérence, or the humanitarian intervention doctrine, was, of course, discarded with the UN Charter and is looked upon by most of the former colonial countries as still an excuse for the outside world to intervene. In its wake, as I said, we have developed, instead of the right to intervene, the responsibility to protect. That's the way the world has come around to it. That's the new phraseology, the responsibility to protect, which means that the first burden is on the nation itself. It has to protect its own citizens. The next question is obviously what happens when it fails to protect its own citizens, and that's the general debate that is going to unfold in the General Assembly. And it's very clear there are sharp divisions in the world, and even in the P5. Russia and China certainly do not accept the idea that the outside world has a possibility even of intervening in some other countries' internal affairs when they're not protecting their own citizens. We'll have to see where this debate goes. Some think it will evolve over time as a real norm. Other people think it'll just be a lot of words, you know, without any particular backup. And like everything else, you always test by the particular case. A case will arrive somewhere which will have to prove the validity of this new doctrine. It was thrown around in the Myanmar business, but it was very early in the game. I don't know whether this, as I said in my remarks, whether the Security Council would have voted to intervene with a force in Myanmar had the government there truly persisted in keeping out any aid whatsoever from the outside world. So, you know, we'll have to see how this unfolds, and I think this is going to be the frontier for a lot of difficult political decisions to be made. I'm very interested in what you said, George, because I'll come back to my friend here, and I will hear what you say in the next panel. I think, for example, if you ask most Americans today, why are we in Afghanistan? Maybe a few would say to get rid of al-Qaeda. That would be some. But a large number of people would say to make Afghanistan safe, to bring civilian rule, to provide aid, to give help, and so on. Whether or not that's the true motivation of our intervention is obviously a subject of great political debate. But in fact, it is very difficult to sell to countries that provide peacekeepers any other argument but the humanitarian. Otherwise, people say, as they said in Austria, they told me all about the debate in the parliament. What the hell are we doing in Chad? You mean, what has Chad got to do with Austria? until it was presented as a humanitarian intervention, helping people who are starving, victims of this, that, and the other thing. So I think you're going to see this confusion continually now. You sell an intervention by using humanitarian arguments. What the real nature, Hans, of the intervention, that's for, you know, people to debate. But I find that very disturbing to me because it's a real blurring of the lines. If you want to do a military intervention, pure and simple, you ought to say so, and you ought to lay your motives on the table and make clear why you're going and what you want to accomplish. But that's been extremely difficult to do in almost all of these circumstances that are coming up.
Stick to your lane. Well, Robert, I'm sure you also got some comments on that.
Yes, I think to answer the very, very first question, when shouldn't we intervene with military forces, Myanmar is probably a great example in my opinion. And it all depends on what the political objectives are. Because we shouldn't kid ourselves, we never have purely humanitarian objectives. There are always politics involved, and responsibility to protect will remain a dream as long as national interests are the driving forces of international politics, and that's the case at the moment. What we do have is a new responsibility to rebuild. That seems to be very much a new rule of international politics, which means if we had intervened in Myanmar with military force, that would have been a political intervention that would have decoupled the regime in Myanmar, and it would have meant state building for probably 30 to 50 years or what have you, because that's how long it takes to reform a political system and rebuild it in a matter large enough to give legitimacy to the initial intervention. So that would be one example. The other one is Afghanistan, and that's where you will always have military force involved. But that's a conflict, and that's where I think one should stick to one's lane. And that's a different thing, because the military is there and it will be involved, but it should stick to its own business. It's always strange to me that a military officer in the field trying to win hearts and minds of the local population. Now this officer has spent an entire career perfecting the use of organized violence or the threat of violence to create peace and stability, to be kind. Yet what his decision is to hand out blankets and food in order to win hearts and minds, when he could actually do as good a job as possible in order to provide security, so that professional humanitarian organizations could do their job, which they have perfected for their entire careers. It's a no-brainer to me, but it seems military officers have a different view on this, and I would actually be curious to hear from my, well, I'm a reserve officer myself, but I'll hand over to the other military.
Sorry, let me give it to the general on my right first.
First of all, I want to say something the gentleman mentioned some minutes ago about the commander of AFRICOM. I 100% agree that the military should do their tasks and the NGOs what they can do better than the military, and there should be no mixture. And Austria, for example, has more than 50 years experience in doing operations, and it is essential and crucial that the military does not mix up the tasks of the military, which means to give a safe and secure environment, with distributing water and food and parcels and so on to the local population. It's the task of the NGOs to do this. And last year, we saw it in the chart. The U4 mission gave a safe and secure environment to the NGOs, mainly to United Nations and CARE and so on.